Wind carried the scent of pine and decay, sharp enough to sting my nostrils as I stood at the edge of the clearing. Snow crunched beneath my worn boots, each step a small defeat that echoed through the silence of the forest. The cabin loomed ahead, if I could even call it that, more like the skeleton of shelter, its roof sagging under the weight of winter's past, walls gray and splintered like old bones left to bleach in the sun. No smoke rose from the chimney, no warmth waited inside, just the promise of 4 walls, which was more than I'd had in weeks. I pulled my threadbare coat tighter, fingers numb despite being tucked into my armpits. My breath formed small clouds that dissolved into the bitter air, vanishing as quickly as I seemed to from everyone's concern. The pack had made their decision 3 months ago, though they'd been deciding long before that. Defective. That's what Elder Moira had called me during the last gathering. Her lips curled in distaste as she looked at my pale blonde hair, my too thin frame, my inability to shift properly even after my 18th birthday had come and gone. An Omega who can't complete the transformation is no Omega at all, she'd pronounced, and the others had nodded. Even my own mother had looked away, shame darkening her features. My father had been gone since I was 12. Taken by rogues, they said, though I sometimes wondered if he'd simply left, because staying with a family that produced a broken daughter was too much to bear. The rejection hadn't come as a dramatic expulsion. It was quieter than that, more insidious. Meals forgotten, my name dropped from work rotations, conversations that stopped when I entered a room. Within weeks, I'd become a ghost, haunting the edges of Packland, invisible, except when my presence proved inconvenient. So I'd left. Or rather, I'd simply walked away one morning and no one had come looking. I forced my feet forward, each step deliberate. The cabin door hung askew on rusted hinges, and when I pushed it open, the groan of wood seemed to mirror the ache in my chest. Inside was worse than I'd imagined. Furniture lay in broken heaps. A table with 3 legs, chairs reduced to kindling, shelves that had collapsed under their own weight. The floor was littered with leaves and small animal droppings, and in the corner, something had made a nest from torn fabric and moss. The single window was cracked, a spider's web of fractures spreading from a central point where something, a stone perhaps, or a desperate fist, had struck years ago, but it was mine. Or at least, it was no one else's. I set down my canvas bag, everything I owned fit inside it, and surveyed the damage with what remained of my optimism. The fireplace still stood, its stones blackened but intact. That was something. The roof, while sagging, hadn't completely caved. Also something. I could work with something. I'd always been good with my hands, good at fixing things, mending what others discarded. Ironic, considering I couldn't fix myself. The first night was agony. I managed to start a small fire using branches I'd gathered and the matches I'd bartered for in the last village I'd passed through. The warmth barely reached beyond the hearth, and I huddled close, wrapped in both my coat and the single blanket I owned, trying not to think about the pack house with its roaring fires and communal dinners. Trying not to think about Sarah, who'd been my closest friend until she wasn't, who'd stopped meeting my eyes weeks before I left. Trying not to think about Marcus. No, I wouldn't think about him at all, about the way he'd looked through me at the last bonfire as if I'd already disappeared. Sleep came in fits, broken by the settling of old wood and the scurrying of creatures in the walls. I dreamed of warmth and belonging, of a time when my mother had braided my blonde hair and told me I was special, before special became synonymous with broken. Dawn broke gray and reluctant, seeping through the cracked window like a half-hearted apology. My body ached from the hard floor, but I forced myself up. Self-pity was a luxury I couldn't afford. I had work to do. I started with the door, using a flat stone to pound the hinges back into alignment. The repetitive motion warmed my muscles, and I fell into a rhythm that quieted the noise in my head. Next came the window. I couldn't replace the glass, but I could cover it with boards I pried from the collapsed shelves, creating a barrier against the wind. It made the cabin darker, but darkness I could handle. Cold was the real enemy. By midday, I'd cleared the floor of debris, sweeping it out with a makeshift broom of bound branches. My stomach cramped with hunger. I'd eaten the last of my provisions yesterday. But I pushed through. The cabin was slowly, stubbornly, beginning to look less like a grave and more like a shelter. I found a stream a quarter-mile into the woods. Its water so cold it made my teeth ache, but it was clean and clear. I filled the dented pot I'd brought and carried it back carefully, already planning how I'd boil it for drinking. There were edible plants even in winter if you knew where to look. My father had taught me that before. Bark from certain trees could be made into tea. Pine needles, too. I wouldn't starve. I refused to starve. The work consumed the days that followed. I reinforced the roof with branches woven together and sealed with mud mixed with pine sap. I repaired the table, lashing the broken leg with strips of fabric torn from my spare shirt. I cleaned the fireplace, removing years of buildup until the draft improved, and the smoke actually went up the chimney instead of filling the room. Each improvement was small, barely noticeable individually, but collectively they began to transform the space. 2 weeks in, I managed to trap a rabbit. My hands shook as I prepared it, not from squeamishness, but from the knowledge that this meat would last me days if I was careful. I smoked strips of it over the fire, hanging them from a rack I'd fashioned from green wood. The smell made my mouth water and my eyes burn with something that wasn't just smoke. I wasn't thriving, but I was surviving. And there was power in that, a quiet defiance that grew with each passing day. It was on the 17th day that everything changed. I'd ventured further from the cabin than usual, following tracks I hoped belonged to deer. The forest here grew denser, the trees closer together, their branches interlocking overhead to create a perpetual twilight. Snow fell in lazy spirals, catching in my hair, and I paused to get my bearings. That's when I heard them. Voices. Male. Multiple. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to hide, but my feet had frozen to the ground. I pressed myself against a thick pine, heart hammering so hard I was sure they'd hear it. Tracking him for 3 days now, one voice said, rough and irritated. He's got to be close. The scent's stronger here, another agreed, this one deeper, carrying an authority that made my wolf, what little of her existed, whimper in recognition. Alpha. He's injured. Desperate. Good. Desperate makes them stupid. I held my breath as they passed within 20 feet of my hiding spot. There were 4 of them, all tall, all moving with the lethal grace of experienced hunters. 3 were dressed in dark, practical clothing, faces hard and alert, but it was the 4th who captured and held my attention. He moved like violence contained, like a storm given human form, taller than the others, with black hair that fell to his shoulders, and eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. He wore no coat despite the cold, just a dark shirt that clung to a frame built for devastation. Even from this distance, I could feel the weight of his presence, the barely leashed power that made the air itself seem to bend around him, and then he stopped. His head turned, nostrils flaring, and those dark eyes swept the forest with predatory focus. I didn't dare breathe, didn't dare move, didn't dare exist. There's another scent, he said, voice low and dangerous. Omega. My heart stopped. Here? One of the others sounded skeptical. We're 50 miles from any established pack. I know what I smell, Dane. The Alpha's eyes continued scanning, and I swore they paused on my tree, lingered there for a heartbeat too long. Female. Alone. Should we? No, the word was final. Absolute. We have a target. He moved on,
Stay
and
focused.
the others followed. But not before one of them, the one called Dane, glanced back with curious eyes. Then they were gone, swallowed by the forest and the snow. I remained frozen for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. An alpha. Here. Multiple wolves who moved like soldiers, hunting someone through my woods. Because that's what they'd become in 3 weeks. Mine. This territory, this solitude, this hard-won survival was mine, and the intrusion felt like a violation. But beneath the fear, beneath the instinct to flee, something else stirred. Curiosity. Because an alpha that powerful, that controlled, hunting this far from civilization. What was he running from? Or what was he chasing? I made it back to the cabin as dusk fell, and for the first time since arriving, I barred the door from the inside. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling I'd repaired with my own hands, and wondered what I'd stumbled into. The fire crackled softly, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. It sounded like a warning, or perhaps an invitation. The howl came again 3 nights later. I'd fallen into a rhythm by then: wake before dawn, check the traps, reinforce whatever part of the cabin seemed weakest, forage for anything edible, return before dark. The isolation had stopped feeling like punishment and started feeling like sanctuary. No judgment here, no eyes cataloging my failures. Just the forest, the cold, and the steady satisfaction of transforming ruin into something livable. But that howl shattered my carefully constructed peace. It wasn't the distant territorial call of a lone wolf. This was closer, urgent, and laced with something that made my barely there wolf press against my consciousness in distress. Pain. The howl carried pain. I should have ignored it, should have barred my door and covered my ears and pretended the forest and its inhabitants were none of my concern. That's what any sensible person would do, especially a defective Omega alone in the wilderness. Instead, I found myself pulling on my boots. The knife I'd found in the cabin's debris felt inadequate in my hand as I stepped into the night. The moon was nearly full, casting everything in silver and shadow. My breath fogged in front of me as I followed the direction of the sound, every step a negotiation between self-preservation and something I couldn't name, stupidity maybe, or the stubborn part of me that had always cared too much, felt too deeply, even when it cost me everything. The howl came again, weaker this time, and I moved faster. I found him in a ravine about half a mile from the cabin, his body a dark shape against the snow. Even collapsed and bleeding, I recognized him. The Alpha from days before. Up close, he was somehow larger than I'd remembered, his presence overwhelming even in weakness. Blood stained the snow around him, dark and spreading, and his breathing came in shallow gasps that steamed in the cold air. He wasn't alone. The other 3 from before stood in defensive positions around him, weapons drawn. The one called Dane spotted me first, his blade rising instantly. "Stay back," he commanded, voice sharp. I froze, hands raised. I just wanted to help. We don't need help from a stray Omega. This from another, younger, with rust-colored hair and a sneer that reminded me too much of Elder Moira. "Move along before you become a problem." But the Alpha's eyes had found me, and despite the pain clearly etched across his features, despite the blood soaking through his shirt from what looked like claw marks across his ribs, his gaze was sharp, assessing. "Let her approach, Garrett," he said, voice rough but steady. "Sir, we don't know." I said let her approach. The authority in those words was absolute. The others stepped back, though their suspicion remained palpable. I moved forward carefully, kneeling in the snow beside him. This close, I could see the full extent of the damage, 4 deep gashes across his torso, still bleeding sluggishly. Whatever had done this had been trying to kill him. "What happened?" I asked, already assessing the wounds with a practiced eye. My mother had been the pack healer before shame made her abandon that role along with her daughter. She taught me much in those early years. "Rogue," he managed. "Rabid. Didn't recognize the signs until too late." Rabid. That explained the erratic attack pattern of the wounds, the way they seemed almost frenzied. It also meant infection was practically guaranteed without treatment. "You need to get him somewhere warm," I said, looking at Dane. "These need to be cleaned and bound, and he needs to shift to accelerate healing, but not until the wounds are treated or the infection will set in his wolf form." "And what would you know about it?" Garrett challenged. "More than you, apparently, since you're standing here arguing instead of helping him." The words came out sharper than I'd intended, but fear made me bold. Fear for a stranger, which made no sense, yet there it was. The Alpha's lips twitched, almost a smile. "She's right. Garrett, stand down." His eyes returned to me. "Your cabin. How far?" "Half a mile. But it's not, it's barely. It has walls and a fire. That's more than here." He tried to sit up and failed, a grunt of pain escaping despite his obvious attempt at control. Between the 4 of them, they managed to get him standing, though he leaned heavily on Dane. I led the way back, hyper-aware of their presence behind me, of how vulnerable I was, How easily this could become another mistake in a lifetime of them. The cabin looked even smaller with 5 people inside it. The men had to duck through the doorway, their broad shoulders seeming to fill every available space. I stoked the fire quickly, adding more wood until the flames roared, then set water to boil in my salvaged pot. On the floor near the hearth, I directed, and they lowered the Alpha carefully. In the firelight, his face was pale beneath its natural tan, jaw tight with controlled pain. His eyes, though, they remained alert, tracking my movements as I gathered what meager supplies I had. I don't have much, I admitted, laying out clean cloth torn from my spare clothing, the small tin of salve I'd made from pine resin and rendered rabbit fat, a bottle of cheap whiskey I'd been saving for emergencies. But I can clean the wounds, at least stop the immediate infection. That's more than we could do out there, Dane said, his earlier hostility tempered by pragmatism. He crouched beside his Alpha. This is going to hurt Cade. Cade. So the Alpha had a name. I'm aware, Cade replied dryly, then his eyes fixed on me. What's your name? Does it matter? I don't enjoy being helped by strangers. Then we're even, because I don't enjoy strangers bleeding in my cabin. I poured whiskey over my hands, then onto the cloth. This is going to burn. I've had worse. I doubted that, but I didn't argue. I pressed the whiskey-soaked cloth to the first wound, and he went rigid, a low growl rumbling in his chest that made my wolf whimper in submission. I forced myself to continue, cleaning each gash thoroughly while his men watched with expressions ranging from concern to grudging respect. You have a steady hand, Cade observed, voice strained but conversational, as if we were discussing the weather rather than me literally digging into his wounds. My mother was a healer. Before. Before what? I didn't answer, focusing instead on applying the salve. It wasn't much, but it would help until his wolf could take over. My fingers trembled slightly as I worked. From cold, from adrenaline, from the sheer surreality of having an Alpha and his enforcers in my tiny, patched-together sanctuary. You live here alone, Dane said. Not a question. Obviously. Why? I tied off the bandage with more force than necessary. Because everywhere else, I lived with others, and that worked out terribly. Garrett snorted. Pack reject? The casual cruelty of it hit harder than it should have. I'd thought I'd built calluses over those wounds, but apparently not thick enough. Garrett. Cade's voice was quiet, but the rebuke in it was clear. Shut up. An uncomfortable silence fell. I busied myself cleaning up, aware of their eyes on me, cataloging everything, the sparse furnishings, the patched walls, the careful organization of my meager possessions, judging, always judging. You did this yourself, Cade said finally. The repairs. Who else would have? Most Omegas. He stopped himself. Most Omegas what? Have a pack to provide for them? Have an Alpha to shelter them? Yes, well. I turned away, unable to meet those 2 perceptive eyes. I'm not most Omegas. No, he agreed softly. You're not. Something in his tone made me look back. He was studying me with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable, but instead felt like being seen for the first time in months. Really seen. Not as a disappointment or a burden, but as a person who'd survived and built something from nothing. We'll stay the night, he said. If you'll permit it. I need to shift and heal, but that's best done after a few hours of rest and with proper warmth. It wasn't really a request. Alphas rarely requested anything, but the courtesy of pretending it was meant something. The floor's not comfortable, I warned. It's better than snow, and we've invaded your space. We'll manage. His men began settling in with the efficiency of people accustomed to rough conditions. Dane positioned himself by the door. Garrett took the window I'd boarded up, and the third, who I'd learned was named Isaiah, sat with his back to the wall, a watchful presence, protecting their Alpha even in a stranger's cabin. I retreated to the corner I'd claimed as my sleeping space, wrapping myself in my blanket and trying to make myself small. The cabin had been mine alone for weeks now. My refuge, and their presence felt like an invasion despite my invitation. But as I lay there, listening to the fire crackle and their quiet breathing, I realized I hadn't felt afraid. Not truly. Cautious, yes. Wary, certainly, but not that bone-deep terror I'd expected when facing strange males in an isolated place. Maybe because despite their obvious danger, despite being predators in every sense of the word, they'd treated me with a rough respect I hadn't experienced in years. Or maybe I'd simply stopped caring what happened to me enough to feel properly afraid. Sleep took me eventually, and I dreamed of howls and dark eyes and hands that built instead of destroyed. I woke to voices. "Can't stay here. We have a job to finish. I'm aware of our obligations, Garrett." Cade's voice, stronger than the night before. "But we also have a debt. To her? She's nobody. She's the reason I'm alive to have this conversation." I kept my eyes closed, unwilling to interrupt, curious despite myself. "With respect, sir, she's a stray Omega living alone in the wilderness. That speaks to instability at best, danger at worst." This from Isaiah, his tone less hostile than Garrett's but concerned. "We should leave compensation and go." "Compensation," Cade repeated, something dark in his voice. "You think money addresses this? I think we have responsibilities that outweigh personal gratitude," Dane said carefully. "The contract can wait another day." Silence. Then Garrett, frustrated, "You're letting her get to you." "I'm recognizing capability when I see it. That cabin was a ruin 3 weeks ago, according to the scent markers. She transformed it alone. She treated wounds that would have incapacitated most people. She did it without hesitation, without asking for payment or favor." A pause. "When was the last time any of you met someone who helped because it was right, not because they wanted something?" No answer came. I opened my eyes to find morning light filtering through the cracks in my makeshift walls. The fire had burned down to embers. Cade sat propped against the wall near the hearth. His bandages fresh. They must have changed them while I slept. His color was better, his breathing easier. Meeting my gaze, he didn't look away, or pretend he hadn't been discussing me. "You're awake," he observed. "It's my cabin. I'm allowed." That almost smile again. True enough. I sat up, running fingers through my tangled blonde hair, suddenly conscious of how I must look. Gaunt, dirty, wearing clothes that had seen better days months ago. But Cade's expression held no judgment, only that same assessing intelligence. "Your wounds?" I asked. "Healing. I'll shift today. Let my wolf finish the work." He tilted his head. "You have questions. I can see them. It's not my business. You bled for me last night, your cloth bandages. I think that makes it your business." He had a point. I drew my knees up, wrapping my arms around them. "Who were you hunting?" "A rogue who's been attacking pack boarders. He killed 3 adolescents last month." Cade's expression darkened. "We tracked him here, dealt with him. But he fought harder than expected." "Is he dead?" "Yes." I should have felt something at that. Horror, maybe, or sympathy. Instead, I just felt tired. "And now?" "Now we finish our contract and return home." "Where's home?" He studied me for a long moment. "North. About 200 miles. The Black Pine Territory." I'd heard of it. One of the largest pack territories in the region, known for its strict hierarchy and powerful alpha. Looking at Cade, I suppose that made sense. "You're far from your territory," I said. "Work takes us where it's needed." He shifted slightly, testing his wounds. "What about you? Where's home?" The question landed like a blow. "Here. Before here." "Does it matter? I'm not welcome there anymore." "Because you're defective." Not a question. He'd heard Garrett's comment last night. I flinched anyway. "Because I can't shift properly. Because I'm an Omega who brings shame instead of value. Because I'm—" I stopped, the words catching in my throat. "Surviving." Cade finished softly. "Building. Enduring. Those aren't defects. Tell that to my former pack. I'd rather tell you." Our eyes met, and something passed between us. An understanding, maybe, or a recognition. He knew what it was to be judged, I realized. Different circumstances, perhaps, but that same weight of others' expectations. The moment broke when Dane appeared in the doorway with freshly caught fish. "Thought we should contribute," he said, nodding at me with something approaching respect. "Since we ate your food last night, it was the first meal I'd shared with others in 3 months, and despite the strangeness of the company, despite everything, it felt almost normal. They asked about my repairs, and I found myself explaining the process, the trial and error, the small victories. They listened like it mattered, like I mattered. And something in my chest, something I'd thought frozen solid, began to thaw. After breakfast, Cade announced he'd shift to complete the healing. His men formed a perimeter outside while he stripped efficiently, without modesty. I turned away, but not before catching a glimpse of the bandages I'd applied, stark white against his skin, and the powerful lines of a body built for survival. The shift, when it came, was beautiful and terrible. Bones cracking, reforming, flesh rippling into fur. Where a man had stood, a wolf now sat, massive and dark as midnight, with those same intelligent eyes watching me steadily. He was magnificent, and I couldn't help but compare him to the pathetic, half-formed thing my own wolf became on the rare occasions I tried to shift. The twisted, painful process that left me caught between forms, satisfying neither human nor animal. Cade seemed to sense my thoughts. He padded closer, snow crunching under massive paws, and pressed his nose gently to my hand. The gesture was unmistakably reassuring, and I felt tears prick my eyes. "Thank you," I whispered, not sure what I was thanking him for. The kindness, the acknowledgement, the simple fact of not turning away in disgust. He remained in wolf form for several hours while his men maintained their watch. I went about my usual tasks, hyper-aware of their presence but trying to maintain normalcy. When Cade finally shifted back and dressed, the wounds were angry red scars but clearly healing. "We leave at dusk," he announced to his men, then turned to me. "Walk with me?" It wasn't a command, but I nodded anyway. We walked in silence at first, following the stream I'd been using for water. The afternoon sun struggled through the canopy, creating patterns of light and shadow across the snow. Cade moved with the easy confidence of someone completely comfortable in the wilderness, yet he matched his pace to mine, never pushing ahead. "You don't have to stay here," he said finally. My stomach tightened. "I have nowhere else to go. That's not what I meant." He stopped, turning to face me fully. "I'm offering you a choice. Come back with us. To Black Pine." I actually laughed, the sound bitter even to my own ears. An alpha offering sanctuary to a defective omega? That's generous. But I'm not a charity case. I'm not offering charity. His expression was serious, intent. I'm offering opportunity. You have skills. Healing, survival, construction. Our pack could use someone like you. Someone like me, I repeated. "You mean someone broken?" "I mean someone who survives when others would quit. Someone who builds instead of destroys. Someone who helps strangers without demanding payment." He stepped closer, and I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. "Your former pack was full of fools if they couldn't see your value." The words settled over me like a blanket, warm and unexpected. I wanted to accept them, to believe them, but years of rejection had taught me caution. "What would I do there?" I asked quietly. "In your pack?" "Whatever you choose. Work with our healers if you want, help with construction. We're always expanding. Or simply exist without constantly fighting for survival." His voice softened. "You shouldn't have to live like this, always one bad winter away from death." "And what would you want in return?" Something flickered in his eyes. Respect, maybe, for asking the question directly. "Nothing you're not willing to give." A place in the pack requires contribution, but that contribution can take many forms. You'd have a room in the pack house, meals, safety. In exchange, you share your skills as needed. It sounded too good to be true, and when your pack discovers I can't shift properly, when they realize what I am, then they'll see what I see, someone worthy of respect regardless of their wolf's cooperation. He paused. "I won't lie to you. There will be some who judge. There always are. But you'll have my protection, and that means something in Black Pine." "Why?" The question burst out of me. "Why do you care? You don't know me." "I know enough." He gestured back toward the cabin. "I know you took a ruin and made it livable. I know you heard a stranger in pain and came running despite the danger. I know you have steady hands and a steadier heart." His gaze held mine, and I know what it's like to be underestimated. That last part surprised me. "You? But you're an alpha. You're..." The youngest son of a dead alpha, who took control of a fractured pack at 19 when everyone said I was too young, too inexperienced, too idealistic. A wry smile crossed his face. I've spent 7 years proving them wrong. Sometimes I think that's all leadership is. Constant proof that you deserve the position. I understood that feeling intimately. The endless need to justify your existence, to prove you weren't the mistake everyone believed you to be. I need time to think, I said. We leave at dusk. That gives you a few hours. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small carved token, a wolf's head in dark wood, intricate and beautiful. If you decide to come, show this at the black pine border. It's my mark. It'll get you safe passage and direct you to the pack house. I took it carefully, feeling the smooth wood against my palm. And if I don't come, then you don't. The offer stands regardless, but I won't force you. He turned back toward the cabin, then paused. For what it's worth, I hope you choose to come. The world has enough people who break under pressure. It needs more who know how to rebuild. I stayed by the stream long after he left, turning the token over in my hands. The carving was exquisite, clearly done by someone with both skill and patience. On the back, I found small letters. CB, Black Pine. Cade Brennan, maybe? The name felt right somehow. The smart choice was obvious. Accept his offer. Leave this precarious existence. Gain the security of pack life again. But intelligence and emotion rarely agreed, and my emotions were a tangled mess of fear and longing and stubborn pride. I'd built something here. Not much by most standards, but mine. Every repair, every improvement, every day survived was proof that I could exist alone, that I didn't need the validation of a pack to have worth. Leaving felt like admitting defeat, like agreeing that I couldn't make it on my own, but staying meant another winter in a patched cabin, meant constant hunger and danger, meant the very real possibility that I wouldn't survive until spring. Pride was a luxury, and I'd already spent most of mine. When I returned to the cabin, I found the men preparing to leave. They'd cleaned their weapons, checked their supplies, erased most signs of their presence. Professional, efficient. The kind of people who knew exactly who they were and where they belonged. Dane caught my eye and nodded, a gesture of acknowledgement that held more warmth than his initial hostility. Even Garrett seemed less openly hostile, though he still watched me with suspicion. Isaiah simply smiled, a brief but genuine expression. Cade stood by the door, fully healed now, looking every inch the powerful alpha I'd first glimpsed in the forest. But when he looked at me, I saw past the authority to something gentler. Have you decided? He asked. I'd been asking myself that question for hours. My mouth open to say no, to thank him politely and watch them leave, to choose the hard-won independence I'd carved from nothing. Instead, I heard myself say, I need to prepare. How long would it take to reach Black Pine? Hope flickered across his face, quickly controlled. 3 days on foot. Less if we push. I can't just leave immediately. The cabin. I gestured helplessly at my refuge. We'll still be here if you need to return, he finished. Pack what you need. We'll wait. It took less time than I expected to gather my life. The canvas bag that had held everything I owned still had room after I'd added the few items I'd accumulated. The salvaged pot, my knife, the warmest clothes, the smoked meat from my traps. Everything else. The broken furniture I'd repaired, the patched walls, the cleared floor. I left behind. Evidence that I'd existed here, that I'd mattered, even if only to myself. At the door, I paused, looking back one final time. The cabin looked almost cozy in the fading light, smoke from the banked fire curling from the chimney I'd cleared. I'd arrived here desperate and left, what? Still uncertain, still broken in the ways that mattered, but somehow stronger for having survived alone. Thank you, I whispered to the empty space, though I wasn't sure what I was thanking it for. Outside, the 4 men waited with patient silence. Cade's eyes met mine, a question in them. I held up the token. I hope your pack is ready for disappointment. They'll surprise you, he said, and you'll surprise them. We walked until full dark, moving through the forest with purpose. I struggled to keep pace, my shorter legs working twice as hard, but I refused to complain. Dane eventually dropped back to walk beside me, adjusting his stride to match mine without comment. The gesture was small but kind, and I found myself grateful for it. We made camp in a clearing, and the men worked together with practiced ease. Fire built quickly, perimeter established, watch rotation determined without discussion. I sat slightly apart, uncertain of my place in this efficient machine. "You'll want to eat," Isaiah said, offering me dried meat and hard bread from their supplies. "Tomorrow will be harder walking. I can manage." "No one said you couldn't." He settled beside me, his presence unthreatening. "Cade told us what you did to that cabin. That's impressive work for anyone, let alone someone alone. I did what I had to. Most people would have given up, found another pack, begged for acceptance, anything but face the wilderness alone." He poked at the fire with a stick. "Takes courage to choose the hard path." "Or stupidity." He laughed softly. "Sometimes those are the same thing." Cade joined us then, settling across the fire. In the flickering light, his features seemed softer, more approachable. "Tell me about your healing training." So I did, describing my mother's teachings, the herbs and their uses, the way to clean wounds and set bones and recognize infection. He listened with genuine interest, asking intelligent questions, treating my knowledge with respect. The conversation flowed naturally, touching on pack dynamics, survival skills, the differences between territories. "Black Pine is structured but not rigid," Cade explained. "We have hierarchy, but it's earned through contribution, not just bloodline. Everyone has a role, but those roles aren't fixed. If someone shows aptitude for different work, we encourage exploration." "Sounds idealistic," I said carefully. "It is. But idealism backed by structure and willingness to enforce standards can work." He met my eyes across the flames. "I won't pretend it's perfect. We have problems like any pack, interpersonal conflicts, resource disputes, occasional challenges to authority. But we handle them with discussion and rules, not just brute force. And if I can't shift properly, the question I'd been avoiding, if my wolf continues to be incomplete, then you'll be an omega who excels in human form." His tone was matter-of-fact. "We have several members who rarely shift for various reasons: old injuries, personal preference, medical conditions. They're no less valuable." I wanted to believe him, desperately. But belief required trust, and trust required risk, and I'd been burned so many times. "Sleep," Dane said, appearing from the darkness where he'd been keeping watch. "Long day tomorrow, and Isaiah's terrible at adjusting pace for slower walkers." "I heard that," Isaiah called from his bedroll. "You were meant to," Dane replied, then looked at me with something approaching kindness. "You did well today. Get rest." I lay down near the fire, wrapped in my blanket and my doubts. Above, stars pierced the darkness, indifferent and eternal. Somewhere nearby, a wolf howled. Not the pained sound that had drawn me to Cade, but something else. A call to pack, to belonging, to home. And for the first time in months, I let myself hope that maybe, just maybe, I was walking toward something instead of running away. The journey to Black Pine took 4 days instead of 3. Not because I slowed them down, though I'm sure I did, but because on the second day, we encountered another group of travelers. Refugees, Cade called them. Though the term seemed inadequate for the bedraggled collection of wolves who emerged from the tree line with hollow eyes and desperate hope. There were 6 of them, 3 adults and 3 children, the youngest barely old enough to walk. Their clothes hung in tatters, and the scent of fear clung to them like smoke. The moment they spotted us, the adults positioned themselves protectively in front of the children, ready to fight despite their obvious exhaustion. "Easy," Cade said, hands raised peacefully. "We're not a threat." "Says the alpha with 3 enforcers," the eldest male replied, voice rough. But his stance relaxed fractionally when he took in our lack of aggressive positioning. "Where are you heading?" Dane asked. "Anywhere that isn't Silverton territory." The woman, dark-haired, with a scar cutting across her cheek, shifted one of the children behind her more securely. "Pack fell apart 2 weeks ago. Alpha died, his sons fought for control, and the whole thing collapsed into chaos. Those of us with children got out while we could." I watched the children while the adults talked. They clung to each other, silent in the way traumatized kids often were, eyes too old for their faces. The smallest one, a girl with matted brown hair, had a cough that rattled in her thin chest. Without thinking, I moved closer. "May I?" I asked the scarred woman, gesturing to the girl. Suspicion warred with desperation in her expression. "What do you want with her?" "Just to check her breathing. That cough sounds bad." After a moment, she nodded. I knelt in the snow, making myself small and unthreatening. "Hi, sweetheart. My name's—" I paused, realizing I'd never actually introduced myself to Cade or his men. They'd never asked, and I'd never offered. "Well, that's not important. Can I listen to your chest?" The girl looked to the woman, received a nod, and moved closer. I pressed my ear gently to her back, listening to the rattle and wheeze, not pneumonia yet, but close. The kind of thing that turned deadly in children exposed to cold and stress. "She needs warmth, rest, and steam to clear her lungs," I said, looking up at the woman. "Do you have supplies? We have what we could carry when we ran." "It's not much." I dug into my bag, pulling out the small bundle of herbs I'd gathered near my cabin. "Thyme and mint. Steep them in hot water and have her breathe the steam. It'll help loosen what's in her chest." I handed them over, watching the woman's expression shift from suspicion to something softer. "Thank you," she said quietly. Cade had been watching the exchange. Now he turned to the refugees' leader. "You need a place to go. Black Pine territory is 2 days north. We can offer temporary sanctuary while you figure out your next move." "We can't pay." "I'm not asking you to. We have resources. You need help. Simple as that." Cade's tone left no room for argument. "You'll work for your keep once you're settled, but that's standard for everyone. No one rides free indefinitely." The relief on their faces was painful to witness. They'd expected rejection, exploitation, or worse. Instead, they'd found exactly what I'd found, an alpha who seemed to actually care about helping rather than using. We traveled together after that, our group now 10 instead of 4. The pace slowed considerably with the children, but no one complained. Isaiah and Garrett took turns carrying the youngest when she tired, their massive frames making her look even tinier. Dane scouted ahead, ensuring we'd avoid any potential threats. I found myself walking with the scarred woman, whose name was Cassandra. She told me about Silverton, the slow deterioration after the old alpha's heart gave out, the brutal fights between his sons, the fear that permeated everything until families started disappearing in the night. "We tried to stay," she said, watching the children trudge ahead. "It was home, you know? Even when it got bad, it was still home. But when Marcus, that's my mate, when he disappeared during a patrol and came back beaten half to death for supposedly supporting the wrong son," she shook her head. "That's when I knew. Home doesn't mean anything if you're not safe there." Her words resonated uncomfortably. My situation had been different, slow rejection rather than violent expulsion. But the core truth was the same. Sometimes staying loyal to a place that didn't value you was just another form of self-destruction. "How did you know to come north?" I asked. "Rumors. Every refugee network talks about Black Pine. Stable leadership, decent resources, willing to take in strays if they prove useful." She glanced at me curiously. "You're with them, but you're not pack. I can tell by the way they orbit the Alpha. You're new, very new. 4 days new. And he offered you sanctuary too?" At my nod, she smiled slightly. "Maybe the rumors are true then. Maybe there really are still good alphas out there." That night we camped in a cave Dane had found, deep enough to shelter all of us and hold heat from the fire. The children huddled together for warmth, while the adults took turns keeping watch. I prepared the steam treatment for the sick girl, and Cassandra helped her breathe the herbed vapor. The improvement wasn't immediate, but by morning, the rattle in her chest had eased. "You have healer training," Marcus observed, his face still bearing the bruises from his beating. "Formal training, not just basic pack knowledge. My mother was a healer. Was. The past tense hurt even now. She taught me before things fell apart." "Their loss," he said simply. "Good healers are worth their weight in gold." Cade appeared at my elbow, settling beside me as the others slept. We'd fallen into this pattern over the past days. Quiet conversations after dark, when the demands of travel eased, and we could just exist without purpose. "You're good with them," he said, nodding toward the refugees. "The children trust you. That's rare." Children are honest. They trust or they don't, without all the complicated politics adults bring to everything. True. He poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling upward. "What Cassandra said about home. Do you agree with her? That it stops meaning something when you're not safe?" I considered the question carefully. I think home means different things to different people. For some, it's a place. For others, it's people. And for some of us, it's just the absence of immediate danger. I pulled my knees up, resting my chin on them. I don't know if I've ever really had a home. Just places I stayed until I couldn't anymore. You could build one. In Black Pine, you mean, or anywhere. But yes, I hope in Black Pine. He turned to look at me fully. "I know you're scared. I know you've been rejected and hurt and taught not to trust promises. But I'm asking you to try. Not for me, for yourself. You deserve more than just survival. What if I fail?" The question came out smaller than I intended. What if I get there and I'm still broken, still wrong, still... Then you'll be broken and wrong in a warm house with regular meals and people who'll value you anyway. His voice was gentle but firm. Failure isn't falling short of perfection. It's refusing to try because you might not be perfect. The words settled into something hollow in my chest, finding purchase in places I'd thought were too damaged to hold hope. On the 4th day, we crested a hill, and Black Pine territory spread below us. It was larger than I'd imagined, a valley dotted with structures ranging from the massive pack house at its center to smaller cabins scattered throughout the forest. Smoke rose from dozens of chimneys, and even from this distance, I could see people moving about, purposeful and unhurried. Gardens lay dormant under snow, but the careful organization was evident. Paths connected everything, worn smooth by regular use. "Home," Dane said with unmistakable satisfaction. We were met at the border by 2 sentries who recognized Cade immediately and snapped to attention. Their eyes widened slightly at the refugees, then at me, but they asked no questions. They simply fell into formation, escorting us toward the pack house. People emerged as we passed, curiosity drawing them from their tasks. I felt their gazes like physical touches, assessing, wondering. An Omega with an Alpha and his enforcers, accompanied by refugees. We must have made quite a sight. The pack house was beautiful in a rough, practical way. 3 stories of solid wood and stone, built to last and to house dozens. Cade led us inside to a massive common room where a fire roared in a hearth large enough to stand in. Comfortable furniture clustered in conversation areas, and the whole space smelled of pine, wood smoke, and bread. An older woman appeared, her silver hair braided precisely, her bearing suggesting authority despite her age. Her eyes swept over our group with sharp intelligence. "You brought guests," she observed. "Refugees from Silverton. They need temporary housing and medical assessment." Cade's tone was respectful but confident. "Can you arrange it, Margaret?" "Of course." Margaret's gaze lingered on me. "And this one?" "This one has a name," I said before I could stop myself. A smile ghosted across Margaret's face. "I'm sure she does. And it is?" "Ilara." The name felt strange on my tongue. I hadn't spoken it aloud in months, but it was mine, one of the few things that had never been taken from me. "Ilara," Margaret repeated, nodding as if filing it away. "Welcome to Black Pine. I'm Margaret, house manager and unofficial keeper of order. You look exhausted." "When did you last have a proper meal?" "I don't remember." "That's what I thought. Come." She gestured for me to follow, then paused to give Cade a meaningful look. "We'll talk later about your habit of collecting strays. I prefer to think of it as recognizing potential," he replied easily. Margaret snorted but didn't argue, leading me up a staircase to the 2nd floor. The hallway was lined with doors, and she stopped at one near the middle. "This is one of our guest rooms." Simple but comfortable. There's a bathing room down the hall, second door on the left. I'll have food sent up, and clothes that actually fit. Her expression softened slightly. You're safe here, Ilara. I know you probably don't believe that yet, but you'll learn. Cade doesn't offer sanctuary lightly, and he doesn't break his word. She left before I could respond, and I stood in the doorway of my assigned room, afraid to enter. It was small, but clean, with a real bed covered in thick blankets, a dresser, a chair by the window. Luxury after weeks on a cabin floor. I crossed to the window and looked out over the territory. People moved below, going about their lives with the ease of those who belonged. Children played in the snow, supervised by watchful adults. Couples walked together, hands linked. It looked peaceful, organized, functional, everything my former pack had been before it had failed me. Or had I failed it? The doubt crept in as it always did, poisonous and familiar. Maybe I really was defective. Maybe Cade would realize it once he saw me try to shift, once he understood the extent of my brokenness. Maybe this sanctuary was temporary, just another place I'd be asked to leave when my presence became inconvenient. A knock interrupted my spiral. A young woman entered with a tray of food and a bundle of clothes, offering both with a shy smile. Margaret sent these. I'm Sophie, by the way. I help in the house. She set the tray on the dresser. If you need anything, just ask. Everyone's pretty friendly once you get to know them. Thank you, I managed. She lingered at the door. Is it true you fixed up old Miller's cabin? That place has been abandoned for years. Everyone said it was beyond saving. I didn't have much choice. Still impressive. She grinned. I think you'll fit in here just fine. After she left, I ate mechanically. Stew thick with vegetables and meat, bread still warm from the oven, apple slices that tasted impossibly sweet. My stomach, unused to such richness, protested slightly, but I forced myself to eat slowly, savoring each bite. Then I found the bathing room and discovered the true luxury of hot water and soap. I scrubbed weeks of grime away, watching the water turn gray, my skin emerging pink and raw. My blonde hair, clean for the first time in ages, fell in wet waves past my shoulders. I looked at myself in the small mirror and barely recognized the face staring back, thinner, older, harder than I remembered, but also somehow more defined. The clothes Sophie had brought fit reasonably well. Wool pants, a soft tunic, thick socks. Everything was clean and sturdy, made for comfort rather than fashion. I felt almost human again. That evening there was a knock on my door. Cade stood there, cleaned up and changed, looking every inch the alpha. There's a gathering in the common room. I'd like you to attend, he said. Not a command, an invitation. But it would help if people met you in a casual setting rather than just hearing rumors. My instinct was to refuse, to hide in this room until I'd built up the courage to face a pack full of strangers. But I thought of the cabin, of choosing to survive alone rather than risk more rejection, and how that choice had nearly killed me. I'll come, I heard myself say. Good. His smile was warm, genuine. You might even enjoy yourself. I doubted that. But I followed him downstairs anyway, stepping into a room full of wolves who would judge whether I was worth keeping. And despite everything, despite all my fears and doubts, I found myself hoping I'd pass their test. Because for the first time in longer than I could remember, I wanted to belong somewhere. The common room had transformed since morning. Where before it had been merely functional, now it buzzed with life. Pack members clustered in groups, their conversations creating a low hum of sound that reminded me painfully of what I'd lost. Children darted between adults, playing some game that involved a lot of giggling and dramatic falling. The firelight cast everything in warm gold, softening edges and creating pockets of intimacy. Everyone turned when I entered with Cade. The silence lasted only a heartbeat, but it felt eternal. I forced myself not to shrink back, not to apologize for existing. These people didn't know me yet, didn't know my failures. I could be anyone here, anything. The thought was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. Everyone. This is Ilara, Cade announced, his voice carrying easily over the space. She'll be staying with us. She's a healer and a builder, and she saved my life 4 days ago. I expect you to make her welcome. It wasn't a request. The authority in his tone reminded everyone exactly who led this pack, and I saw several people straighten, their expressions shifting from curiosity to acceptance, or at least polite neutrality. Margaret appeared at my elbow, steering me toward a group of women gathered near the fire. These are our healers, Lydia, Rachel, and Nina. Ladies, this is Alara. She has formal training. Lydia, the eldest, studied me with sharp brown eyes that reminded me painfully of my mother. Formal training from where? Riverside Pack. My mother was head healer there. I met her gaze steadily. Before I left. Riverside. Lydia exchanged glances with the others. I knew their healer, Claire, wasn't it? Excellent with bone setting, terrible with bedside manner. Despite myself, I smiled. That was her. She used to say patients healed faster when they were too irritated with her to die. Lydia's expression warmed fractionally. You're Claire's daughter, then? She mentioned having a girl, though it's been years since I saw her at the regional healing circle. She gestured to a chair. Sit. Tell me what you know about infection management and shifter wounds. Just like that, I was being tested. But this was a test I could pass, one based on knowledge and skill, rather than wolf strength or perfect shifting. I answered her questions, sometimes uncertain, sometimes confident, but always honest when I didn't know something. The other healers listened, occasionally interjecting their own experiences, and slowly the conversation shifted from examination to exchange. We could use another set of skilled hands, Rachel said eventually. She was younger, maybe 30, with gentle features and scars on her hands from years of work, especially with winter injuries. People get careless when they're cold. I'd like that, I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. I've missed healing work. The evening progressed, and I found myself pulled into different conversations. Sophie introduced me to other young pack members, who asked about the cabin with genuine interest rather than judgment. Marcus and Cassandra appeared, looking cleaner and more rested. Their children fed and settled. The little girl with the cough waved at me shyly, and I waved back, relieved to see her breathing easier. But not everyone was welcoming. I felt the hostile stares from certain corners, wolves who saw an outsider and instinctively distrusted. A blonde woman named Victoria watched me with particular intensity, her expression suggesting she'd already decided I was a threat. When I accidentally met her gaze, she didn't look away, just raised an eyebrow in challenge. That's Victoria, Sophie whispered, following my line of sight. She and Cade were involved a few years back. She's second in command of the enforcers now. Brilliant strategist, but she doesn't like change. She thinks I'm here to take something from her. Probably. She's territorial. Sophie shrugged. But Cade ended things with her long ago, and she chose to stay professional. Mostly she's just protective of the pack. I could understand that, even if her hostility made my skin itch with anxiety. Protective was better than cruel for cruelty's sake. Cade found me later in the evening, when the gathering had mellowed into smaller groups and quieter conversations. You're doing well, he said, handing me a cup of something warm that smelled of apples and cinnamon. I can see them warming to you, some of them maybe. I sipped the drink, letting the warmth spread through my chest. Victoria looks like she wants to throw me off the territory. Victoria looks like that at everyone. It's her resting face. But his tone turned more serious. She's cautious, not cruel. Give her time to see you're not a threat. What if I am, though? He looked at me quizzically. A threat? To what? To pack stability. To the order you've built. I'm broken, Cade. What if that brokenness is contagious? What if... Alara. He set down his cup and turned to face me fully. You're not broken. You're different. There's a distinction. My wolf is not the sum of who you are. Your value doesn't rest on whether you can shift perfectly. It rests on your actions, your choices, your character. He lowered his voice. I told you I was underestimated. Do you know why? Because I refused to lead through fear and dominance alone. I wanted to build something better, something sustainable. Half the pack thought I was weak. Some still do, but you proved them wrong. I'm still proving them wrong, every day. Leadership isn't a destination. It's a constant journey. His eyes held mine. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be willing to try, to contribute, to be part of something larger than yourself. Can you do that? I thought about the cabin, about the satisfaction of each repair, each small victory over decay. I thought about treating Cade's wounds, about helping that sick child, about all the small ways I'd already contributed without thinking. Yes, I said quietly, I can do that. The next weeks unfolded with surprising ease. I worked with the healers, learning their methods while sharing my own. Lydia proved to be an excellent teacher, demanding but fair, and she seemed to appreciate having someone who could keep up with her rapid-fire questions and expectations. We treated everything from training injuries to childhood illnesses to the inevitable consequences of pack members doing stupid things. Why would anyone think climbing an icy tree to retrieve a stuck kite was a good idea? I asked one afternoon, binding the sprained wrist of a sheepish young man who'd done exactly that. Because his daughter was crying, Lydia said dryly. Men become idiots when children cry. It's a universal constant. The young man winced. She really wanted that kite, and now she has a father, with a sprained wrist, and no kite, because it's still in the tree. I finished the binding. Keep this dry and don't use it for 3 days. If the swelling doesn't go down, come back. He thanked me and left, and Lydia nodded approvingly. You're good at this. Patient but firm. It's a balance many healers never find. The compliment warmed me more than it should have. I also spent time with the refugees, helping them settle. Cassandra's daughter recovered fully, and Marcus found work with the construction crews. They weren't the only newcomers. Apparently, Black Pine regularly took in strays, and Cade's reputation for fair treatment drew wolves from failing packs across the region. We're growing faster than expected, Margaret told me one morning over breakfast. We'll need to expand the housing. Cade's been talking about building another dormitory-style building for single wolves and newcomers. I could help with that, I offered. I'm decent with construction. She raised an eyebrow. The mysterious cabin builder reveals herself. I'll tell Cade. The construction project began 2 weeks after my arrival. Cade himself worked alongside the crews, and I found myself part of a team that included Dane, Isaiah, and surprisingly, Victoria. She barely spoke to me at first, her movements efficient, but her silence pointed. But as the days passed and she watched me work, measuring carefully, cutting precisely, never shirking the heavy lifting, something shifted. You actually know what you're doing, she said one afternoon, sounding almost surprised. Did you think I was lying about fixing the cabin? I thought maybe you'd exaggerated. People do that to impress alphas. She secured a beam with quick, competent movements. But you're not exaggerating. You're genuinely skilled. Thank you? It's not a compliment, just an observation. But her tone had lost its edge. Cade has good instincts about people. I doubted him on you, but I'm starting to see what he saw. It wasn't friendship, but it was acceptance. I'd take it. As winter deepened, I fell into rhythms I hadn't known I'd missed. Morning healing rounds with Lydia, afternoons on construction when weather permitted, or helping in the communal kitchen when it didn't. Evenings in the common room, where I'd gradually become part of the background rather than a curiosity. People greeted me by name now, asked my opinions, included me in discussions, but I still hadn't shifted. The full moon gatherings were communal affairs, where pack members celebrated their wolves, running together through the forest in a display of unity and strength. I attended the first one, watching from the pack house, as wolves of all sizes and colors streamed into the night, their howls echoing across the valley. Cade found me there, still in human form, though I knew he longed to join his pack. You should go, I said. They need their alpha. In a moment, he leaned against the doorframe beside me. You haven't tried to shift since you arrived? No. Why not? Because I was terrified. Because I didn't want these people who were starting to accept me to see how broken I truly was. Because the pain and humiliation of incomplete transformation felt worse now that I had something to lose. I'm afraid, I admitted quietly, of the shift, or of what people will think. Both. Neither. I don't know. I wrap my arms around myself. What if I try and fail in front of everyone? What if they realize Cade the idealist made a mistake taking me in? Then they'd be wrong, and I'd correct them. He moved closer, his presence warm and solid. But Alara, you can't hide forever. Your wolf is part of you, functioning or not. Denying her doesn't make her go away. She's barely there. Maybe she's waiting for you to stop being afraid of her. The words hit harder than I expected. Had I been afraid of my own wolf? Afraid of the part of myself that refused to cooperate, that marked me as defective? Come with me, Cade said suddenly, extending his hand. Where? Somewhere private, away from the pack. If you're going to try, do it without an audience. I hesitated, then took his hand. His fingers closed around mine, warm and steady, and he led me into the forest. We walked for perhaps 20 minutes, following a path that wound deeper into the territory. The sounds of the pack run faded behind us until we reached a small clearing, moonlight streaming through the bare branches above. This is where I come when I need to think, Cade said. When the weight of leadership gets too heavy and I need to remember I'm more than just an alpha. Why bring me here? Because I want you to understand something. He turned to face me fully. Your wolf doesn't define your worth, but she is yours, and she deserves acknowledgement. Even if she's imperfect, even if she struggles, she's part of who you are, and who you are is someone valuable. Tears pricked my eyes. You say that, but you don't know. Then show me. The challenge was gentle but real. I could refuse, walk away, continue hiding, or I could trust. Trust him, trust this place, trust that maybe I was more than my worst fears. I stepped back, giving myself space. My hands shook as I started to undress, folding my clothes carefully because they were borrowed, and I'd learned not to waste anything. The cold bit at my skin, but I barely felt it. All my focus turned inward, reaching for that presence I'd spent years trying to ignore. My wolf stirred, hesitant, but responding. The shift began. It hurt. It always hurt. Bones grinding and reforming wrong, muscles tearing and healing incorrectly, fur sprouting in patches rather than smoothly. I heard myself whimper, a sound of pain and frustration that echoed in the clearing. The transformation that should have taken seconds stretched into agonizing minutes, and then I was something. Not quite wolf, not quite human, caught between forms in a way that would have made any normal shifter recoil in horror. My proportions were wrong, my fur incomplete, my paws malformed. I was a mockery of what a wolf should be, and shame burned through me hotter than any physical pain. I couldn't look at Cade, couldn't bear to see the disappointment I knew would be there. But then he was kneeling in front of me, one hand extended slowly. May I? I didn't understand what he was asking until his hand made gentle contact with my malformed head, stroking the patchy fur with the same care he'd shown when helping me build the dormitory. You're beautiful, he said softly. I made a sound, something between a whine and a scoff. I mean it. His hand continued its soothing motion. Do you know what I see? I see a wolf who fights to exist despite every obstacle. I see courage and persistence and refusal to give up, even when giving up would be easier. He met my eyes. Wolf eyes. At least in shape, if not in function. Your wolf is here, Alara. She's struggling, yes, but she's here and she's trying. That's not defective. That's extraordinary. The words broke something in me, some wall I'd built between myself and my wolf, some barrier of shame and rejection. I felt it crack and crumble, and suddenly I wasn't fighting my wolf anymore. I was with her, acknowledging her, accepting her imperfect existence as part of mine. The shift reversed more easily than it had begun. Within moments I was human again, naked and shaking, but somehow lighter. Cade wrapped me in his coat without comment, his expression gentle. She's not defective, I whispered. She's just different. Yes. I've spent years hating her, hating myself. I know. He pulled me closer, and I let myself lean into his warmth. But you don't have to anymore. You're exactly who you're meant to be. We stayed there for a long time, the forest quiet around us, the moon bearing witness to something shifting in my chest. Not healing. Wounds like mine didn't heal cleanly, but maybe scarring in a way that left me stronger rather than weaker. When we returned to the pack house, the run had ended. Wolves lounged in various states of contentment, their energy expended, their unity reaffirmed. Lydia caught my eye and smiled, a question in her expression. I smiled back, tentative but real, and saw understanding dawn. The months that followed were not easy. Acceptance was a process, not an event, and I still struggled with believing I belonged. But slowly, incrementally, Black Pine became less a sanctuary and more a home. I became a full member of the healing team, trusted to handle cases independently. I completed the dormitory project and immediately began planning improvements to the pack house's aging structure. I made friends, real friends, like Sophie, who dragged me to gatherings even when I wanted to hide, and Rachel, who shared my dry sense of humor. Cassandra's family thrived, and she started training with the hunters, her survival skills from Silverton's collapse translating into valuable expertise. Other refugees arrived, and I found myself helping them settle, offering the same tentative hope Cade had once offered me. And Cade became something I hadn't anticipated. It started small. Conversations that lasted longer than necessary, hands that lingered when passing tools, smiles that felt private and warm. He sought my opinion on pack matters, valuing my outsider's perspective. I found myself watching for him in crowds, my heart lifting when our eyes met. "You're falling for him," Sophie said one day, her tone matter of fact. "I'm not, Ilara. Everyone can see it. The question is whether you'll do anything about it." I didn't know how to answer that. What could I offer an alpha? I was still broken in fundamental ways, still struggled with my wolf, still carried scars from rejection that would probably never fully fade. But one evening, as we stood together watching the sunset paint the valley in golden purple, Cade reached for my hand. Just that simple gesture, fingers interlocking, palms pressed together. "I've been thinking," he said quietly. "Dangerous habit." He smiled. "About us." My heart stuttered. "There's an us?" "I'd like there to be, if you're willing." He turned to face me fully. "I'm not asking you to be anything other than exactly who you are. I'm just asking if you'd consider being that person with me, as partners, as equals." I'm not... I stopped myself, taking a breath. "I'm not perfect, Cade. I'm still learning to accept my wolf. I still have moments where I don't believe I belong here. I might always struggle with those things." "I know." His hand tightened around mine, and I'm an alpha who sometimes doubts his own decisions, who carries the weight of every pack member's well-being, who's building something unprecedented and has no guarantee it'll work. We're both imperfect. Maybe that's why we fit. I thought about the cabin, about how I'd taken something ruined and made it livable through patience and persistence. I thought about how Cade had done the same with this pack, with me, with everyone he'd gathered into this unlikely family. "Yes," I said, and felt a smile break across my face. "I'd like there to be an us." He kissed me then, soft and careful and full of promise, and for the first time since I'd left my birth pack, I felt truly, completely home. Spring came eventually, melting the snow and revealing the garden plots I'd helped plan. New construction began, family cabins for growing households, an expanded healing center, a school for the pack's children. I worked on all of it, my hands growing calloused and strong, my confidence building with each completed project. I shifted occasionally now, always in private, always with Cade nearby. My wolf never became perfect, never matched the sleek beauty of full shifters. But she existed, and I'd stopped apologizing for her existence. Some of the younger pack members even started calling me the patchwork wolf with affection rather than mockery, and I wore the title like armor. One year after I'd first stumbled into Black Pine territory, Cade called a pack meeting. Everyone gathered in the expanded common room. The original members, the refugees, the newcomers who'd heard of this place where broken things were valued rather than discarded. "This pack was built on a simple principle," Cade said, his voice carrying to every corner. "That worth isn't measured by perfection, but by contribution. That strength comes in many forms. That everyone deserves a place to belong." He looked directly at me. "Some of you know Ilara's story, how she survived alone, how she built shelter from ruins, how she joined us, uncertain and afraid. She's since become invaluable as a healer, a builder, a friend. And for me personally as a partner." My face heated at the public acknowledgement, but I didn't look away. "She represents what Black Pine stands for. he continued. The refusal to accept that broken means worthless. The courage to keep trying when everything says give up. The transformation from survival to thriving. He smiled. I'm proud to lead a pack that recognizes value in all its forms. Thank you all for making this place what it is. The room erupted in howls of approval, and I felt tears slip down my face. Not from sadness or shame, but from overwhelming gratitude. I'd come here expecting temporary shelter at best, rejection at worst. Instead, I'd found home. That night, lying beside Cade in the room we now shared, I thought about the girl who'd stood in front of a ruined cabin months ago, certain she'd die alone and forgotten. That girl would have never believed this future. Surrounded by pack, valued for her skills, loved for exactly who she was. What are you thinking? Cade murmured, pulling me closer. That I'm glad I didn't give up. That frozen cabin saved my life. But you gave me a reason to live it. He kissed my forehead. You gave yourself that reason. I just provided the space for you to discover it. Outside, wolves howled in the distance. My pack, my family, my home. And for the first time in my life, I howled back. The sound was rough, imperfect, uniquely mine.